it says something about God that he would keep his promises. I did a quick word search about the word promise, especially in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, the majority of times that the word promise is used, it is contained in a phrase such as, just as he had promised. In other words, every time God made a promise, that promise came true. The writers of the Old Testament took great pains to remind us that when a promise was fulfilled, that God had indeed promised that beforehand. Towards the end of Joshua, it says, "Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass." Now, that's a good example. It's kind of in a bad way in Jeremiah 42:3. It says, "Now the captain of the bodyguard," now let me just stop right there and tell you who that was. So this is after the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonian. They had been resisting, and they had been under siege for a really long time, and they had basically experienced starvation, and finally the Babylonian armies were able to enter the walls of the city, and Jerusalem fell to them. And the final fall, there were like 2 or 3 different falls there, but the final one occurred in the year 586 BC. So this is after the city had fallen, and this captain of the bodyguard was a Babylonian soldier. So this guy was a pagan. He in his mind, the highest gods in the world were gods like Marduk and Anu and Ishtar, and that's who he worshiped. But look what he says. Look at the insight that he says, because he's going to speak to Jeremiah. And I'll go ahead and tell you that shortly after he says this, the guy sets Jeremiah free so that he doesn't have to go to Babylon. But look what he says. This pagan worshiper of other gods says, "The Lord your God promised this calamity against this place, and the Lord," that's Yahweh, "has brought it on and done just as he promised. Because you people sinned against the Lord, against Yahweh, and did not listen to his voice, therefore this thing has happened to you." Pretty great insight for a worshiper of Babylonian deities, right? So, just as when God promised good things, he always brought them about, so also when God promised things that were not good, he still brought those about. Now, it was good that God kept his word. It's hard to say that what happened to the Jews was good, but it was good because it was the right thing for God to do. It was good because it would be part of bringing them back to God. Well, let's just put it this way. When you read the Bible, you should always take God's promises seriously, and you should also take his warnings seriously. All right? So it definitely says something about God that he would keep his promise.